a todos, bienvenido a mi canal. Soy Alice. I don't know why I did that in Spanish because none of the rest of the video is going to be in Spanish. I recently, 9 months ago, moved to Barcelona and it's been weird. I thought I would talk about some of the culture shocks that I have experienced moving to Barcelona from two previously small and smaller villages in Spain. So for those of you who don't know me or my channel, I previously lived in a tiny town in Cantabria, a pretty small province in Spain. I was there for nearly 2 years, and before that I briefly lived in a town called Los Palacios y Vilafranca in Andalusia near Sevilla. And I have lived in a lot of big international cities like during my life, including Melbourne, Sydney and Berlin and Ho Chi Minh. Just to give you some context, some of these were culture shocks and some of these I would definitely say were reverse culture shocks, moving back to the big smoke. Barcelona is barely the big smoke. And I've armed myself today with a definition for culture shock, because if I don't explain it, I know people are going to get angry at me in the comments for making statements about things that are different. Culture shock is an experience a person may have when one moves to a cultural environment which is different from one's own.
It is also the personal disorientation a person may feel when experiencing an unfamiliar way of life due to an immigration or a visit to a new country, a move between social environments, or simply transition to another type of life. One of the most common causes of culture shock
involves individuals in a foreign environment. I hope that clears it up for you guys in the comments who say, well, obviously it's different because you moved to the other side of the world. No shit, Sherlock. Anyway, I just wanted to keep this pretty light-hearted. Some things that I've noticed and experienced. I would love to hear in the comments below if you've ever experienced something similar or reverse culture shock when moving to an Anglo area. So the first thing that I really noticed in Barcelona that is different to everywhere else in Spain that I have spent time in, like substantial time in, is the manners. One of the biggest culture shocks that I had moving to Andalusia and then to Cantabria was that people aren't effusive and you don't say please and thank you for everything. Using super polite forms for ordering and things like that definitely does not happen in Andalusia. Whereas in Barcelona, it does. One example of this was my boyfriend got himself into a bit of trouble with the local barista. So she was in the bar and he didn't want to take up too much of her time. He said, "Me pones un café con leche cuando puedes." And she looked at him and was like, "No hola, no como estás, no qué tal." And he was really taken aback because really honestly, like in Cantabria and in Andalusia, it would have been perfectly normal to go in somewhere where maybe you're familiar with the person but you don't know them particularly well and just kind of quickly order and get out of their way. I wouldn't say that they're like at the level of pleases and thank yous that we maybe are in the Anglo world, but there's definitely like somewhere in the middle of what you would do to be normal and not seem weird in Andalusia and what you would do in an Anglo country. So it's kind of like a little happy middle ground here. The next one that I noticed was English. There's just too much English in Barcelona. I would say that in Barcelona I don't find people speak to me in English. Generally, like if I'm in a store or a shop or things like that, and if I initiate the conversation in Spanish, they never respond to me in English or anything, but I just hear so much English. And the first time that it really messed with me was the first full day that I spent in Barcelona. So because I moved during a pandemania, it was a very arduous trip to get here in the first place. I was so tired. I got to the hotel, I pretty much fell asleep that day. And then the next morning I got up and had to get my keys for my apartment and drag myself here, and I was just not fully functioning. After I got into the apartment, I was thinking, yeah, okay, I'm going to go down and get a coffee. So I went into one of the local cafes where a lot of the signs are in English, which just
sent my brain into full English mode.
And I walked up, and I swear to God, this is the first time I've ever done this since I moved to Spain. Even when I first moved here and I didn't speak pretty much any Spanish, I never did this. I walked in and just ordered in English. I've never been so embarrassed because he looked at me, and I found out later he is Catalan, he's local. He just looked at me like, what? And because I had was tired, I'd spoken in English, I felt embarrassed. I couldn't even seem to get myself out of this situation. Yeah, so I don't go there anymore. The next thing that I noticed, which I always find funny because I just really distinctly remember this comedian saying, Sydney, one of the only parts of the world where you can be an adult on a skateboard and no one will look at you twice. Barcelona is exactly the same. There are so many skateboards, not only skateboards, but rollerblades around this city. It is such a it's such a wheel city. So you have people on rollerblades, skateboards, bikes, just everywhere you go, anywhere from probably Marbella to Raval. It's so prevalent that there's anti-skateboard movements in Barcelona, which I also find just so strange. The next reverse culture shock I had was the food in Barcelona. So there is just so much international food in Barcelona compared to anywhere else in Spain. I would even say, from my very brief experiences in Madrid, there's still a lot more in Barcelona. I wouldn't say that it's to the level of what it is in Australia, but it is pretty amazing how much there is here. And I mean, there's an amazing hot pot in Barcelona. I would never, ever, ever have expected to find a fully authentic hot pot in the middle of Barcelona city. The only thing I would say is you do win and lose on that. So sometimes in Barcelona, well, I feel like it's really easy to find cuisines from different parts of the world. Sometimes it can be harder to find the proper local Spanish restaurants, and I know they exist 100%, and when everything's more open and we can go out a lot more, I'm sure it'll be much easier to see and recognize. Because the one problem with Barcelona is when you read restaurant reviews, well, if there's too many gears reviewing the food, they don't necessarily know what they're looking for. So if anyone has any amazing local restaurant recommendations for me, I would love to hear them in the comments below. So the next shock that I had was kind of worked both ways. So it's the cost of living in Barcelona. So it would be remiss not to admit that Barcelona is way more expensive than most parts of Spain to live in. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the most expensive part of Spain. I think there are actually some towns in Catalonia that are pretty expensive as well. But obviously coming from Cantabria and Andalusia, where you can get amazingly cheap rent, the rent was the first thing here that really shocked me. Salaries here are often higher, but not necessarily. So depending on what work you're doing and what you're comparing with, that could be kind of a massive sting. But in saying that, it's also still shocking to me that you can live in a big cosmopolitan city like Barcelona at such a lower cost of living than, say, Sydney. I think Sydney is the best kind of equivalent of an international city in Australia because you have the beaches, it's on the coast, it's a similar climate, you know, young people moving abroad. And Sydney is just so expensive. Even if I ratio out the rates that I pay for rent here compared to what I was paying in Sydney, and I would say objectively I was getting paid better in Sydney. It's not even a contest. Barcelona is so much more livable, and even though I would say it's a lot more expensive, and I can totally appreciate that depending on where you're working it can be super expensive, it's still, for the quality of the internationalism in the city, I would say that it's still kind of shocking that it can be as affordable as it is. The other crazy thing here is often eating out in a restaurant or something like that will be the same as pretty much as what it was in Cantabria or Basque Country, which I know aren't the cheapest parts of Spain, but still. So yeah, I had my initial shock of like, oh my god, rent for what space you get as well, especially, and the views that you do not get here. But then I've had like the second shock where I'm like, but actually like it's still not as bad as like London, New York, Sydney, and you have a really nice quality of life in Barcelona. Like, I would never choose London or New York over Sydney or Barcelona, personally. I am a weather person. The next shock that I experienced in Barcelona was the dogs. There are dogs everywhere, like literally everywhere. This is by far the most dog-friendly city that I've lived in my entire life, and I would say Catalonia in general is very, 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 very dog-friendly. Like, I love it. Okay, in summer you can't take the dogs to every single beach, but they do have dog-designated beaches even in summer. And just in general, you just see dogs everywhere. They're socialized really well. Like, Chapo can go up to other dogs and we don't have to worry about how they're going to interact with each other. People are really good with their dogs here. There's just so many dogs here. I know everyone kind of goes on about Paris being a dog-friendly city, but I would have to say, if you're a dog in Paris, Paris is kind of a shit city. You can't go to any parks. There's no off-leash areas. There's just not really anything fun for a dog to do. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is just very stupid and like doesn't mean or matter at all. They have at least one extra floor in buildings in Barcelona. So they'll have like Entresol, which I believe in Catalan is actually Entresol, but I'm not 100% sure.
Entresol.
Anyway, you have like ground, E, first, second, third, fourth. But in some buildings, they even have ground, something else, then E, so entresuela. Entresuela or entresuelo? I don't know, actually, I should have checked that. Primera, segunda, tercera, etc. But like, why? So you think you're living on the 3rd floor, but you're actually living on the 4th floor. And you think you're working on the 6th floor, but you're actually working on the 8th floor. And if you're claustrophobic like me and you don't like lifts, that causes either sweat or stress. What's with the extra floor, guys? Anyway, this video is getting really long. I had other things to mention, but I will just put them into another video sometime. I'd love to hear anything that you've had culture shocks from when you've moved anywhere else, and if you can relate to any of the things I've mentioned in this video. Especially if you've also moved to Barcelona, maybe you've also found the same thing. But yeah, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on everything. I need to end this video because my camera is literally gonna die. I almost said, hasta luego, muchachos. I'm in a really weird mood today, by the way. I went for a really long run this morning and I'm really tired. I like literally ran to Forum. Oh, are you impressed? I'm impressed with myself, clearly.